Greetings, dear friends. Queen Elizabeth I, revered as the Virgin Queen, the pride of England, was a figure of unparalleled grandeur. Yet, there was one truth few dared whisper. Her presence could shift the very air in a room, and not always pleasantly. Beneath the voluminous skirts, painted lips, elaborate wigs, and scented gloves lay a relentless struggle to uphold a regal facade while her body, like any other, battled the realities of the 16th century. Tonight, we'll peel back the velvet curtains of her splendid court to uncover the true aroma of power. Before we dive in, if you enjoy this journey, please like the video and subscribe. It truly supports what I do. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan for a gentle hum, and let's step into the past together. Picture yourself dreaming of a palace-like golden walls, silken drapes, candlelight flickering on polished floors. But pause for a moment and imagine this instead, a chamber glowing with warmth. Yet the air feels heavy, thick with the scent of too many bodies, unwashed wool, and tallow candles burning with a faint animalistic whiff. You breathe in, expecting roses or lavender, but instead catch a lingering note, something stubborn, like an uninvited guest who refuses to leave. Welcome to Surmise Palace, the beating heart of Elizabeth's reign, a place of dazzling beauty and, quite possibly, one of Europe's most pungent royal residences from the outside. Surmise was a vision of splendor, towering stone walls, endless corridors, windows catching the sunlight, and flags dancing in the breeze. Musicians played, and ladies swept through in gowns worth more than a farmer's livelihood. It was the perfect stage for a Renaissance queen, except for one small detail: ventilation was nowhere to be found. Step inside, and the illusion wavered with every breath. The air wasn't your ally. Nobles tucked herbs into their sleeves and hung clove-studded oranges from their belts, not for decoration, but as a defense against the overwhelming stench. Elizabeth herself was a master of this olfactory warfare. Her chambers brimmed with pomanders, perfumed gloves, and gowns infused with dried flowers and spices. When she entered a room, she didn't merely walk, she floated in a cloud of fragrance so potent it outlasted most of her courtiers' ambitions, and she needed it. The palace didn't just smell of people, it smelled of chaos. Imagine sweat-soaked velvet, furs unwashed for years, and the smoky residue of animal fat candles clinging to tapestries. All of it mingled into a scent that was, frankly, unforgettable. But let's not judge too harshly. This was the 16th century, where daily baths were unheard of, and weekly ones were a luxury. Bathing monthly, that was showing off. Water was distrusted, believed to open pores and invite disease. Instead of washing, people masked odors with perfume, powder, and hope. The logic was simple: if it smells pleasant, it must be clean. Picture wearing layers of heavy clothing, dancing in a crowded hall, eating spiced meats, and sweating profusely. Then, imagine hanging that same gown in a wardrobe, only to wear it again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. No soap, no water, just a quick brush, a whiff of lavender stuffed in the sleeves, and a prayer. That was royal life. At Surmise, every scent told a story. The candles, made from cheap tallow, burned with a greasy, barnyard-like aroma. The gowns, never truly cleaned, carried the wearers weak their meals, their moods, their stresses. Elizabeth's rooms, though drenched in perfume, weren't immune. The velvet absorbed everything, and the feather mattresses exhaled it slowly. Her presence might mask the worst of it, but step behind the curtain, and the truth was clear. The court was a spectacle. From afar, but up close, it was a sensory battlefield. Nobody dared complain, at least not openly. To suggest the Queen's court smelled like a summer market was a quick way to lose favor. Ambassadors might note it in private letters, but in person, they bowed, smiled, and breathed through their sleeves. Scent wasn't just personal, it was political. A pleasant aroma signaled power, wealth, and belonging. Those who could afford imported roses stood apart from those stuck with wilted rosemary. Elizabeth understood this better than anyone. Her fragrance wasn't accidental. It was a carefully crafted weapon, announcing her presence before she even entered a room. Her perfume routine was a ritual of survival. Maids began with thick oils rubbed into her wrists and behind her ears, Sachets of clove, cinnamon, lavender, and rosemary were sewn into her gown sleeves. Finally, a mist of crushed resin's ambergris or musk created a protective cloud. This wasn't about beauty. It was about control. In a world where bathing was rare and 5 layers of fabric were standard, a queen's body could betray her. Elizabeth ensured it never did. Her scent was a myth in itself, a barrier between her humanity and the court's scrutiny. The court followed her lead. Everyone reeked, of course, but how you reeked mattered. Sweat and oil will mark you as forgettable, but layer that with costly oils, and suddenly you were noble. Elizabeth elevated this to an art form. One ambassador described her presence as heavy in the air. Another noted rooms needed airing out long after she left. They didn't dare say to her face such honesty might land you in Ireland, but they noticed her fragrance wasn't just masking odor. It was asserting dominance. You could smell a peasant and grimace. You smelled the queen and felt awe. Her perfumes weren't cheap. Musk came from deer glands, civet from the rear of a wild cat, ambergris from whale vomit aged in the ocean. These were rare, foul in origin, and outrageously expensive perfect for a monarch. She didn't aim to smell clean. She aimed to smell rich. Even on sweltering summer days, when perfume melted into sweat and wigs trapped heat, her scent remained a statement. It was unique, part myth, part flesh, part medieval grit. Courtiers bowed, kissed her glove, and spoke of the weather, never mentioning the weight of her presence settling on their skin. The court mimicked her, naturally. Men dabbed oils behind their ears. Women tucked herbs into corsets. The air grew so thick with fragrance that visitors reported headaches or fainting spells. Yet, they smiled through it. Passing out from perfume was a badge of honor. Proof you'd been near greatness. Elizabeth's scent wasn't just personal, it was policy. It entered rooms before she did, lingered after she left, and reminded everyone of her power. In a world without microphones or headlines, her fragrance was her first impression, her lasting legacy. Let's turn to the gowns. These were no ordinary clothes. They were living archives. Brushed but never washed, perfumed but never soaked. Imagine a velvet dress, embroidered with gold, worn day after day through sweat-soaked banquets, intense council meetings. Water was the enemy. It could shrink, stretch, or ruin delicate fabrics. Instead, maids brushed the seams, shook them near windows, or hung them by fires to draw out dampness. Sachets of rosemary, lavender, or orange peel were sewn into linings, creating an illusion of freshness from a distance. Up close, the truth was different. These dresses smelled like their wearers' lives, not lavender. Elizabeth's wardrobe was a fortress of illusion. Her undergarments, linen shifts, and stockings were washed occasionally, but the outer layers, never. They carried stains of wine, traces of rouge, the faint sourness of stress. Maids worked silently, brushing away dust, tucking in herbs, pretending the fabric was pristine. A gown might be stored for a season if its scent grew too strong, but washing it was unthinkable. These weren't clothes, they were symbols, too sacred for soap. Gloves were another story. Soft leather, sometimes silk-lined, they were soaked in rose oil, violet, or camphor. Elizabeth wore them constantly, gesturing grandly, offering them for courtiers to kiss. It was better to kiss a perfumed glove than a hand unwashed for weeks. These gloves weren't cleaned either. If too worn, they were replaced. If stiff, they were softened with scented paste. They carried the residue of meals, handshakes, and thrown-arm grips, yet their fragrance outlasted their stitching. The wardrobe chamber itself was a sensory paradox, not clean, not decayed, but something in between. Dry herbs, old sweat, rose oil, and camphor mingled into a scent that was uniquely royal. A foreign envoy once likened the court to a church on fire, smoky, sanctified, and slightly flammable. Indeed, the oils and powders rubbed into fabrics sparked fears of accidental fires. A sleeve too close to a candle could smolder, and there were whispers of such mishaps, quickly hushed to preserve the court's dignity. These garments weren't just worn, they were performed. A well-brushed gown signaled stability, a perfumed hem power. Elizabeth's attire was her shield, distancing her from the ordinary. The court followed suit, airing clothes by windows, beating them with paddles, sprinkling powders, but never washing. Water was for peasants. Nobility relied on vinegar and herbs. The palace's scent was complex old fabric, new perfume, stale sweat, burnt tallow and effort layered over avoidance, clinging to skin, hair, and memory. Beyond the perfume, gloves, and brushed velvet, there was one truth Elizabeth could never fully mask: her own body and her court. Bathing was not a daily ritual, but a rare and risky affair. Each morning, as the palace stirred and kitchen fires sent smoke curling through the halls, she sat in silence, her maids assembling her image with meticulous care. The process began with a thick layer of churus, a paste of white lead and vinegar. Smoothed over her face and neck, it created a flawless, porcelain mask pale as moonlight, untouched by the sun. In her time, paleness was power, a sign you didn't toil outdoors like a commoner. But this beauty came at a cost. The lead burned her skin, caused rashes, and seeped into her body, a slow poison she wore for the sake of divinity. Next came the shimmer-crushed pearls dusted lightly across her cheeks and forehead, catching the candle light with an otherworldly glow. It wasn't natural. It wasn't meant to be. Then, vermilion of vibrant red pigment laced with mercury sulfide was tapped onto her cheeks, suggesting warmth, youth, a pulse she could no longer claim effortlessly. Her lips, on days when strength needed to be projected, were tinted with the same dangerous red. These weren't cosmetics. They were weapons, masking the cracks of age and illness. The damage was undeniable. Over time, the lead and mercury etched lines deeper than time alone could. Her skin grew raw, especially around her nose, and the makeup had to be layered thicker each day to hide it. A diplomat once noted her face seemed to melt by evening, the illusion faltering as the hours wore on. Another observed how the mask held only from certain angles. Yet, Elizabeth persisted. She had to. A queen couldn't appear weak, not in public, not even in private. Her face was her shield, her symbol, and perhaps in her quietest moments her cage. Her maids worked in silence, their hands steady as they applied the toxic pigments. They saw the red patches, the thinning skin beneath her jaw, but they said nothing. Their role wasn't to reveal the queen, but to preserve her. By the time she stepped into the court, her transformation was complete. Flawless skin, flushed cheeks, bright eyes. But beneath it all was a fragile truth: skin that stung, hands that trembled, eyes that tired too quickly. The paint flaked, the illusion wavered. But she carried on, because the alternative was unthinkable. No one questioned it. Courtiers, ambassadors, even poets who sang of her radiant face knew it was artifice. They didn't care. The illusion was more important than the woman beneath. Elizabeth wasn't a person. She was a painting in motion, a statue that spoke. When the light hit her just right, her makeup shimmered like glass, and people stared not for her beauty, but for her permanence. Time might not forget her, but her skin did, and the more she faded beneath the lead, the more she relied on it. What began as a disguise became her face, hiding not just age but exhaustion. A queen too tired to falter. Submerging in water was seen as dangerous, a gateway for disease to slip through open pores. The fear wasn't filth, it was sickness. So, instead of scrubbing clean, people performed cleanliness. They dabbed, they scented, they disguised. For Elizabeth, this meant a careful dance of illusion, where fragrance stood in for soap, and ritual replaced rinsing. Her bathing, when it happened, was a private ceremony, conducted with trusted maids in a warm chamber, curtains drawn tight. Herbal water was prepared not for cleansing, but for restoring the illusion of freshness. A cloth, dipped in rose water or vinegar infused with thyme, was passed gently over her face, hands, or chest, never the legs, never the feet too intimate, too vulnerable. The air carried steam and candle smoke, a faint floral sharpness cutting through. It wasn't about removing dirt, it was about maintaining the myth. For daily care, small bowls of scented water sat on tables. A linen square, soaked in perfumed vinegar, was brushed along her neck, temples, or wrists. The goal wasn't purity, but presence of sharpness that suggested cleanliness without the risk of a bath. Wooden tubs existed, tucked away in storage, but they were rarely used, reserved for fevers or moments when odor demanded attention. Even then, bathing was cautious, like stepping into a physician's. Care done with doubt, not delight. Herbs were the court's true allies. Sachets of mint, rosemary, or burnt orange peel were pressed against the skin, leaving a cloudy warmth and a comforting scent. But the skin beneath remained untouched, oily, dusty, carrying the residue of yesterday and the day before. To Elizabeth's court, dirt wasn't the enemy. Smell was, if you didn't stink. You weren't dirty. If you smelled of flowers, you were clean, even if your body told a different story beneath the layers. This logic, strange to us now, was rooted in fear of plague, of unseen illnesses, of air that could kill if it touched damp skin. Elizabeth wielded her pomander like a shield, inhaling its clove and lavender when courtiers drew near. It looked elegant, but it was defense. She knew the stench of her court, and she had no intention of letting it cling to her. In summer, the heat made it worse. Linen clung to skin, wigs turned sour, and the air grew thick with sweat and tallow smoke. Yet, no one reached for soap. They piled on more powder, more spice, more distraction. The servants saw it all. They refreshed the bowls, scented the gloves, and carried away the waste. But they never spoke of the truth. The system worked because no one admitted it didn't. Elizabeth lived by this rule. Her body was sacred, untouchable, but undeniably human. It sweated. It ached. It betrayed her beneath the corset. Yet, she held herself like a statue, and the court played along, pretending the scent of roses could erase the reality of flesh. Elizabeth's face was her fortress, a canvas painted to defy time and human frailty. Beneath the painted mask of Elizabeth's face, another truth festered, one she guarded as fiercely as her throne. Her mouth, hidden behind tight lips and perfumed handkerchiefs, told a story no poet dared to sing. The Virgin Queen loved her sweet scandied violets, marzipan, sugared almonds tucked into ornate boxes, all symbols of wealth in a time when sugar was a luxury beyond most dreams. She indulged freely, her table brimming with these delicacies, not just at feasts but as daily comforts. But her teeth paid the price. By the midpoint of her reign, they had begun to rot, first a subtle darkening, then a nagging tenderness, and soon a throbbing ache that no amount of rose water could soothe. In the 16th century, dentistry was less a science and more a punishment. Physicians offered what they could: powders to rub on gums, cloves to chew for fleeting relief, metal picks to scrape at decay. When pain became unbearable, iron forceps waited no anesthetic, just a brutal yank and a hope the infection wouldn't spread. Elizabeth resisted as long as she could. The thought of opening her mouth, letting someone peer into her vulnerability, made her recoil. A queen's weakness was not for public display, but the pain was relentless, forcing her to allow a few trusted doctors to work in secret, far from the court's prying eyes. They packed her mouth with wax, applied oil-soaked cloths, even mixed opium into paste to dull the agony. It helped, but only for a moment. Her breath changed with the decay. It grew heavy, sour, carrying a hint of something deeper, something alive and unyielding. Courtiers noticed, how could they not? A faint curl of the air when she spoke, a thickness that made them lean back instinctively. Yet, no one dared acknowledge it. The queen did not smell. The queen could not smell. When conversations grew strained, when fans fluttered a little faster, they blamed the room, the heat, the season, never her breath. Euphemisms became their shield. She was weary. The air was close, the banquet to warm. But Elizabeth knew. The human nose is honest, more so than words or mirrors. She saw the flinches, the hesitant pauses, the slight tilt of heads as courtiers approached. She adapted with her usual precision. She spoke less in close quarters, kept a scented handkerchief laced with orange blossom or clove near her lips. She offered her gloved hand for greetings, keeping others at a distance. The court followed her lead, as always. Fans grew larger, gloves more fragrant, speeches shorter. Long monologues gave way to nods, gestures, polite silences. It was safer to flatter from afar, easier to admire without breathing too deeply. A visiting noble once described her presence as rich and enveloping, a delicate way of saying her scent was inescapable. Another called the air around her thick with dignity. They chose their words carefully, masking truth with flattery. The decay progressed. Some teeth fell out quietly, others required painful extractions. Chewing became a challenge, and Elizabeth began to avoid certain foods. She picked at soft dishes soups, stewed fruits, her beloved sweets losing their charm. Rumors whispered through the palace. She left banquets early, spent hours rinsing with rose water, rested alone after meals. These stories never reached the official chronicles. The queen was eternal, unyielding, untouched by something as mundane as a toothache. Her doctors grew more concerned, their visits more frequent, but their work remained hidden. In her private chambers, she endured the pain, the swelling, the dread of each bite. The court kept its distance, too polite to name what they sensed. There was something deeply human in this silence, in the way everyone protected the illusion. They weren't lying. Not exactly. They were preserving a myth that had carried England through wars, plagues, and doubts. If ignoring her breath meant upholding her legend, so be it. But history has a way of noticing. The truth lingered in letters, in subtle shifts in her routine, in the way her smile tightened. Her lips pressed closed even in laughter. Behind the powdered face and perfumed gloves was a mouth that suffered quietly. A queen who ruled through pain she could never name. In the heart of surmise, tucked behind carved doors and heavy curtains, stood a chair unassuming, almost plain, with a worn cushion hiding its purpose. This was no throne. It was Elizabeth's close stool, her private seat, though no one dared call it a toilet aloud. It was crafted for dignity, a sturdy wooden frame with a round hole beneath, leading to a brass or pewter chamber pot. Even a queen, draped in silk and scented with musk, had to answer nature's call. But she didn't go alone. Attendants, trained in discretion, managed the ritual. They brought basins, cloths, fresh herbs, and bowls of scented vinegar. Their eyes stayed low, their voices silent, because this wasn't just a bodily function, it was a ceremony. Surmise had no plumbing, no levers to whisk away waste. Everything stayed until a servant, low in rank but high in tact, carried it off to a pit or river. The room was closed, draped in heavy curtains, with narrow windows that barely let air move. The smell settled, a quiet presence no one acknowledged. They fought it with sachets of lavender hung on hooks, bowls of dried flowers, and orange peels soaked in vinegar. Sometimes, a maid would swing a censer, letting smoky trails drift through the stillness. But the room always reclaimed its truth, a scent of flesh beneath the finery. Elizabeth rinsed her hands with rose water, poured from a jug into a silver basin. It wasn't washing, not in our sense, just a dab, a freshening, a gesture called clean. The close stool was scrubbed with vinegar, wiped with thyme-soaked cloths, covered with fresh linen. But the pot beneath held more than waste. It carried her hours, her silences, the aftermath of a bad feast, the pain of a body that sometimes betrayed her. No one spoke of it, not in whispers, not in jest. They called it her comfort or retreat, never a toilet. It was the one place she didn't need to speak. Yet even here, she sat with grace, her robes lifted carefully, her face composed. A queen could not falter, not even in private. Some days, the smell escaped, creeping past curtains into nearby halls. Courtiers opened windows, lit candles, dabbed perfume on their cuffs, and carried on. It wasn't foul, not in the obvious way, but it was human to human for a palace of gold and pageantry. Elizabeth knew the limits of her perfumes, but she also knew the power of pretending. The close stool stayed hidden, the scent was managed, and her gaze remained steady. If she could smile through sickness, she could sit in silence and make the world believe she was above such needs. Yet, beneath the palace, something brewed, a truth no rose water could erase. A reminder that even queens were bound by flesh. The court's hygiene was no better. Hands were rarely washed, only freshened. At banquets, nobles wiped fingers on napkins, sleeves, or tablecloths, then reached for goblets or tore at roasted meat. Servants offered scented cloths, waved lazily over hands like brushing away dust. A courtier might rub a lemon peel between their palms or dab vinegar on their gloves. But the hands inside stayed untouched, carrying the day's grease and grit. Women's sleeves, long and heavy, trapped food beneath rings. Silk gloves, never turned inside out, held the scent of unwashed skin. Pomanders, small orbs of herbs and resin hung from waists, hinting at cleanliness while the truth lingered louder. During dances, hands joined, sweat passed, and gloves rubbed against brocade. Perfume mingled with skin, but no one paused to wash. They were too busy laughing, twirling, showing grace in stiff gowns and tight shoes. Filth was an uninvited guest, ignored through smiles. Gestures signaled refinement. A gloved hand offered for a kiss, a perfume cloth held to the nose. Fingertips dipped in herb-filled bowls before meals. These replaced soap, stood in for water, and in Whitehall's grandeur, they were enough. But illness traveled fast to touch, a cough, a shared fan. A fever in one corner of the ballroom became a whisper by dawn. Still, the basin stayed empty, the rose water reserved for the queen. Elizabeth was cautious, her hands rinsed with scented water, her gloves a fragrant barrier. She understood appearances. A clean palm meant a clean reign. But even her habits were symbolic. Her sleeves remained heavy, the skin beneath her rings unseen. Rumors spoke of a special glove for sleeping, lined with herbs to soothe her skin overnight. True or not, it fit her world, where cleanliness was a performance, a layer between truth and touch. Each morning, she dipped her fingers in a bowl, letting the scent rise like a prayer. Meanwhile, the court's hands stayed darkened with ink, soot, and sugar, reaching for jewels and laces unbothered. The performance wasn't about hygiene, it was about what they could pretend to see. Elizabeth's gowns were more than fabric, they were banners of power, heavy with embroidery, fur, and expectation. From a distance, they shimmered like divine creations, but up close, they smelled of their wearers, sweat from long ceremonies, heat from wigs, the breath of crowded halls. These were not clothes to be washed, but costumes to be preserved. Maids turned them inside out, brushing seams with stiff bristles, shaking them near windows to let the breeze carry away the worst. Water was unthinkable, it could ruin velvet, fade dyes, unravel the illusion of opulence. Instead, sachets of lavender, orris root, or clove were sewn into hems, tucked between pleats, masking the truth with a costly scent. Each gown carried history, a stain of wine on a cuff, a trace of rouge where a cheek brushed the collar, the faint sourness of a heated council meeting. They weren't cleaned, they were maintained, pampered with powders and aired by fires. If a mark was too obvious, a flower was stitched over it. If the smell grew too strong, the gown was stored for a season, but never washed. These were archives of the queen's life, too sacred for soap. The wardrobe chamber smelled of effort-dry herbs, old sweat, rose oil, and camphor blending into a scent that was neither clean nor decayed, but royal. A foreign envoy once called the court a church ablaze, smoky and sanctified, with a hint of danger. The oils and powders in the fabrics sparked fears of fire sleeve too near a candle could smolder. And whispers of such accidents were quickly hushed. The court followed Elizabeth's lead, airing clothes by windows, beating them with paddles, sprinkling vinegar-soaked cloths, but never risking water. A doublet cost more than a year's rent. Better to smell of rosemary and wool than ruin it. The palace's scent was a complex dance-old fabric, new perfume, burnt tallow, and human effort layered over avoidance. Above these gowns sat the queen's wigs, a kingdom of their own. Dozens lined her chambers, sculpted into curls, coils, or waves, lacquered with wax and dusted with violet powder. They didn't smell of hair, but of cinnamon, burnt herbs, and candle smoke. Everyone knew her real hair had thinned, its fiery red faded to gray. But the wigs weren't for deception, they were for display. Each was a fragrant crown, so heavily scented it announced her arrival before her footsteps did. But they were never washed, too fragile for water, too stiff for combs. They held onto whatever touched them, face powder, rouge. Sweat from her scalp mixing with oils into a scent uniquely hers, sweet, spicy, slightly sour. Attendants dusted wigs with lavender or bergamot, dabbed vinegar to tame sharpness. But the core remained a used wig, assertive in summer's heat. Each had its own character, one heavy with cloves, another sweet with rose petals, one unfortunate piece nicknamed the Widowmaker for its mildewy note from a damp spring. No one suggested washing them, they were too sacred, woven into royal ritual. Instead, they were aired near windows, brushed with squirrel-tail brushes, stored in mint-lined boxes. The scent served a purpose, it signaled her presence, kept servants at bay, and reminded envoys they were near something divine. Wigs were heavy, uncomfortable, pinned to stay put. Rumors claimed Elizabeth slept upright to preserve them. her head resting in a frame while maids adjusted curls in the dark. Likely exaggerated, but believable in a court where image was everything. Lesser nobles tried to mimic her, powdering their hair with weaker blends. But they lacked her intensity, her years of layered ritual. Standing near her was a ceremony visceral. You saw the wig's brightness, the lace pressed to her temple, and smelled the history. The refusal to be ordinary. Beneath it all was a human head, tired, aging, sweating through the divine disguise. The court was a sensory battlefield, where scent was power's first move. A noblewoman's violet oil signaled refinement, a courtier's musk-marked wealth. Poor attendants smelled of wool and cheap herbs, tolerated briefly. Elizabeth's fragrance was a symphony rose, musk, orange blossom engineered to overwhelm. It arrived before her, lingered after, a shield and a brand. Envoys rode of the court's temple-like air, heavy as a Damascus market or a July funeral. Not compliments, but proof her presence was felt. In an age of slow letters and forged messages, smell was reliable. If you were important, you smelled it rich, complex, deliberate. Her fragrance shifted with purpose saffron for tense negotiations, lavender for suitors, frankincense when betrayal loomed. Diplomats mimicked her, hoping to flatter her nose, though some overdid it, entering like a spice market ablaze. At banquets, the scent wore intensified tablecloths soaked in rose water, silverware white with orange oil, gloves reeking of ambergris. It was less about dining and more about breath control. Courtiers coughed behind napkins, hoping no one noticed. Elizabeth's scent claimed the room. Her power complete before a word was spoken. Paintings couldn't capture it, but those near her knew her rules were inhaled, not just seen. The court adjusted. Meetings followed baths. Visitors were warned to wear scent, but not too much. Maids carried herb sachets for quick fixes. Policy was debated through clouds of resin and orris root. Rebellion, when it came, passed through lavender. It's easy to laugh now, to imagine a queen ruling by fragrance, but in her world, scent was loyalty, obedience, command. It was her first impression, her lasting legacy, overwhelming rooms without a word. This was no accident. Elizabeth's court was a theater, her body the stage. Every morning, she was assembled powdered, perfumed, draped in heavy gowns. It took hours, not for comfort but for control. Her face, painted with lead and mercury, shimmered under candle light, hiding the cracks of age. Her gowns, never washed, were brushed to look new, their scent masking their history. Her wigs, stiff with wax, carried the weight of her myth. She wasn't a woman. She was a monument, built layer by layer, scent by scent. The court played along, mimicking her every move. If she tilted her head, so did they. If she dabbed rose oil on her gloves, they followed. Her speech patterns careful pauses. Measured wit became the court's language. Her chuckle, melodic and controlled, echoed in council chambers. Men dabbed perfume on cuffs. Women tucked herbs in corsets. One young lord, eager to impress, doused himself in so much musk he nearly fainted at a banquet, his doublet reeking for days. Another sleeve caught a candle. Briefly aflame from the oil's a cautionary tale, not about scent but about flames. The court laughed quietly, but they understood. To belong, you imitated the queen. Her courtiers mirrored her posture, her phrases. Even her boredom-tapping rings on armrests when impatient. Some tried her wardrobe. One lord in white satin so powdered it looked like pastry. Another in a ruff so stiff he couldn't turn his head. These weren't mockery but loyalty. To stand out, you blended in, reflecting her image like warped mirrors. The palace grew quieter, more absurd. As scents grew louder and voices softer, they performed in a glass box, pretending not to sweat, not to age, not to smell of anything but roses. Elizabeth had taught them, decay was to be perfumed, not acknowledged. For all the splendor of Elizabeth's court, the gilded tapestries, the shimmering gowns, the air thick with musk and roses, there was one glaring absence: proper sanitation. Beneath the polished floors of surmise, a silent problem festered, one the queen preferred to ignore. Sewage systems were rudimentary at best, a network of cracked channels carrying urine, kitchen runoff, human waste, and the occasional rat carcass to pits or rivers. The queen, ever focused on her image, poured her wealth into portraits, banquets, and silks imported from distant lands, not into pipes or drains. To her, a new gown stitched with pearls was a legacy. A new sewer was merely a chore. The issue didn't go unnoticed. Courtiers, ever tactful, hinted at the earthy vigor in certain hallways or the dampness near the West Wing as stairwells. A foreign ambassador once described the palace as magnificent, but with a peculiar warmth in the air, a polite way of noting the faint whiff of rot curling through the floorboards. Elizabeth treated these complaints like minor inconveniences, much like a drafty window. Close it, perfume it, pretend it's gone. Funds that could have fixed the channels went to pageants and jewels, leaving the palace's underbelly to bubble quietly beneath the grandeur. Her solution, as always, was fragrance. Bowls of dried lavender sat in corners, rosemary sprigs hung from curtain rods, and juniper smoke wafted through halls before important guests arrived. It was like hanging a tapestry over a crumbling wall. You couldn't see the damage, but you could still smell it. Some rooms were worse than others. The antechamber near the kitchens carried a sulphurous gust on warm days, while the privy by the chapel was so potent that even devout clergymen hurried their prayers. Servants scattered mint underfoot, crushed herbs along flagstones, but it was a losing battle. The stench, though never named, was as much a part of surmise as the chandeliers. No one complained too loudly. Perhaps they feared the Queen's displeasure, or perhaps, after years in the perfumed haze, they simply grew accustomed to it. The smell became part of the palace's rhythm, like candle smoke or damp stone. Nobles held scented handkerchiefs closer to their noses, servants avoided certain corners, and Elizabeth, wrapped in her cloud of ambergris and clove, seemed oblivious. There was poetry in the paradox, court of golden ceilings and velvet slippers, undercut by the gurgle of waste beneath. The earth always made itself known, no matter how thick the powder or how starched the rough. The Queen's priorities were clear. A glowing portrait would echo through history. A new drain would not. Extravagance was power, while sanitation was mundane. She chose beauty over utility, perfume over plumbing, and in doing so, mirrored her era's values. Hygiene was a vague, mistrusted concept, but a well-scented monarch was a statement of control. The irony was stark, and escaping the filth of common life. Elizabeth built her court atop a growing problem, one no amount of rose water could fully mask. The palace's scent, so carefully crafted, still carried whispers of the truth beneath the floor. Each morning began with a ritual, a performance before a single word was spoken. Elizabeth's body was not her own, it was England's, a canvas for divinity. Her maids assembled her with precision, starting with a thick layer of churus, a lead-based paste smoothed over her face and neck until every trace of humanity vanished. Paleness was not just beauty, it was virtue, a sign she was above the sun-soaked labor of peasants. The lead burned her skin, left rashes, but it created a porcelain mask, flawless under candle light. Then came vermilion, a mercury-laced red dabbed on her cheeks to mimic youth, a pulse she no longer had naturally. Her lips, when needed, were painted to project strength. These weren't cosmetics, they were armor, hiding the cracks of age and illness. The process took hours. Corsets were laced tight, bruising ribs to force a regal posture. Sleeves, heavy with embroidery, scratched if pinned carelessly. A ruff, wide as a halo, framed her face, detaching it from her body like a divine icon. Gloves, steeped in lavender or civet, shielded her hands from the world, their scent reminding courtiers they kissed a symbol, not a woman. This wasn't preparation. It was transformation. By the time she emerged, Elizabeth wasn't a tired queen with aching gums. She was the Virgin Queen, radiant, untouchable, and barely able to move under the weight of her own myth. Hygiene, in her world, was a performance, not a practice. Hands were wiped with perfumed cloths, faces blotted, hair powdered, not washed. Bathing in water was a medical risk. Appearing dull or sweaty was a social one. The court accepted this logic. Smell pleasant, and no one questions the last time you saw soap. Elizabeth's rituals set the standard. Other women, eager to mirror her power, painted their faces until their skin peeled, perfumed their underarms until the scent clung to curtains, wore gowns so wide they turned sideways to fit through doors. They smiled through it, not for comfort, but for duty to be beautiful, always, no matter the cost. The pressure wasn't unique to her time. Swap the roughs for filters, the trues for foundation, and the echo remains. Elizabeth's mornings were about control, not vanity. In a world that saw her as a marriage prospect or a puppet, she became a spectacle. Her look was power, a daily message, I am your queen, worship accordingly. Her scent drifted through halls before her words, her presence a masterpiece of illusion. Beneath it all was a body sweating, aching, human, but that was hidden, whispered about in private, denied in public. Cleanliness was a theater, and Elizabeth was its star. Her body belonged to the crown, not to her. It couldn't sweat, age, or falter. A blemish wasn't just physical, it was symbolic, a crack in the myth of the Virgin Queen. Dirt was a threat. A stain on her gown could spark gossip. A yellow tooth could hint at mortality. So, she layered perfume like insurance lavender, ambergris, herbs to smother any hint of humanity. Her court followed, stuffing dresses with sachets, wiping hands with vinegar, painting over flaws with lead. To be clean was to be seen as clean, and in a reign balanced on reverence and suspicion, appearance was everything. Elizabeth's independence as a queen without a husband or heir relied on this myth. She had no scepter, alone she had her image, polished daily to outshine her enemies. Her portraits showed an unchanging face. Even as her joints stiffened and teeth fell out, her scent, a cloud of musk and roses, walked ahead of her, preserving her throne. The tragedy is its familiarity. Even now, bodies are billboards, judged for polish, not feeling. Elizabeth performed at best, turning vulnerability into policy. Her close stool, disguised as a chair, was aired with herbs, its odor masked with vinegar. Nothing unpleasant could touch her, not even reality. Her health, though, told a different story. Beneath the white gowns and powdered cheeks, her body ached. Toothaches throbbed through sleepless nights. Fevers came and went. Bones creaked with every step. Yet, the show continued. She hid pain from courtiers, advisors, even herself, standing through ceremonies with clenched jaws, her eyes betraying nothing. When her strength failed, she retreated to her chambers, where only trusted maids and physicians saw the truth. Curtains closed, rumors swirled she was resting. She had a cold but never the full story. Inside, she was a patient, wincing as infections flared, pressing clove-soaked claws to her gums, sipping opium-laced wine to dull the pain. Her doctors, more confident than skilled, spoke of humors, not bacteria. They prescribed oils, powders. Silence, they knew her greatest need was to remain unseen in weakness. Outside, the myth persisted. The queen was radiant, eternal. Inside, she lay on silk, trying not to cry because crying wasn't queenly. Pain wasn't queenly. Weakness could unravel decades of illusion. She wasn't just a woman. She was England. Her portraits, painted to show youth, smoothed wrinkles, brightened eyes, erased veins. They were propaganda, upholding what her body couldn't. She bore the fatigue, the headaches, the weight of pretending, because faltering invited chaos. The court played its part, bowing lower when she seemed tired, laughing louder when her voice cracked. They ignored the sweat on her brow, the tremble in her hands. Keeping the illusion was a shared duty. To serve the crown was to protect its dignity, even as the body beneath crumbled. In private, maids wept over sweat-soaked linens. Advisors exchanged glances when she stumbled. But none spoke it aloud. To acknowledge her mortality was to risk their own. Elizabeth remained untouchable, her court a balancing act, her throne upright on a creaking floor. Her triumph was an endurance, not wars or diplomacy, but the willpower to stand when her body begged to sit. She gave everything to the image, even when little remained. History remembers the queen, not the woman, the icon, not the aches. Her courtiers mimicked her to survive, copying her scent, her speech, her posture. If she dabbed rose oil, they did too. If she paused before speaking, they followed. Her chuckle, controlled and melodic, became their chorus. One lord, overzealous, doused himself in musk until he nearly fainted, his doublet reeking through prayers. Another sleeve caught fire from a candle, a warning to mind flames, not scent. The court laughed, but they understood. To belong, you mirrored the queen. This imitation was survival. Her habits, head tilts, ring tapping. Careful dissenters became court etiquette. Men dabbed oils, women tucked herbs in corsets. The council chamber smelled like a perfumery, heavy with florals and musk. Some overdid it, their enthusiasm bordering on absurd. One lord's pastry-like satin, another's rough poking ears. It was loyalty, not mockery. To stand out, you blended in, reflecting her warped image. The palace grew quieter, more controlled, as scents grew louder. They performed in a glass box, ignoring sweat, age, and rot, because decay was to be perfumed, not named. Hygiene in Elizabeth's time wasn't about germs known then, but about miasma, the belief that foul air carried disease. Bad smells meant corruption. Good smells meant purity. Perfume was a talisman, not a tool. Walls were hung with lavender, carpets sprinkled with rose water, gloves soaked in ambergris. The result wasn't cleanliness, but confusion. Moldy walls, stained floors, life in the corners, all masked by a garden scent. Elizabeth leaned into this, her rosewater rinses and scented gloves warding off illness and judgment. She smelled better than peasants, so she was healthier. Scent was status. A noble's worth measured by their aroma. Musk for power, spices for connections, sweat for the poor. The irony was cruel. Disease spread through crude drains and stagnant water, not air. But they didn't know. Rats roam, rivers stank. Yet as long as death didn't smell, they believed it wasn't there. Elizabeth's court fought invisible threats with herbs, smoke, and hope. Desperate, fragrant hope. We laugh now, but we're not so different. We chase clean smells, lemon disinfectant, minty breath covering reality with prettier illusions. Elizabeth's world had no microscopes, no sanitizers, just lavender and belief. They thought a meadow's scent could tame the world. It couldn't. Disease spread, people died, but they died believing they tried. Elizabeth's court was a world of illusion, where every gesture, every scent, every layer of silk served a purpose greater than comfort. It served power. The palace shimmered with the promise of divinity, but beneath the chandeliers and velvet, the truth lingered in the air, a mix of rosewater, musk, and the undeniable hum of humanity. The queen, painted in lead, draped in unwashed gowns, and crowned with perfumed wigs, was not just a woman but a myth in motion. Her body, though, told a quieter story, one of aches, fevers, and a relentless fight to keep the mask intact. By the end of her reign, her teeth were crumbling, her bones weary, her skin raw beneath the powder. Yet she stood, smiled, and ruled because the crown demanded it. Her health declined in shadows, hidden behind closed doors where only trusted maids and physicians witnessed the cracks. Toothaches kept her awake, infections flared, and fever swept through like uninvited guests. She pressed clove-soaked cloths to her gums, sipped wine laced with opium, crushed lavender to calm her senses. Her doctors, with their ruffled collars and vials of hope, offered little beyond powders and silence. They spoke of humors, not germs, prescribing oils and quiet to preserve the illusion. Outside her chambers, the court carried on, insisting the queen was radiant, eternal, untouched by pain. Inside, she was a patient, enduring in a silk-draped bed, trying not to wince. Because weakness was not queenly, Elizabeth bore all the back pain, the headaches, the fatigue that seeped into her like winter's chill. She stood through ceremonies, her jaw clenched, her posture rigid, her eyes betraying nothing. When her strength faltered, she vanished behind scented curtains, letting the myth take over. Her portraits, painted to defy time, smoothed wrinkles, brightened eyes, erased the veins on her hands. They were propaganda, not truth, showing a queen who never aged even as her body begged for rest. The court played along, bowing lower when she seemed tired, laughing louder when her voice trembled. They ignored the sweat on her brow, the shake in her fingers, because to acknowledge her frailty was to risk their own. Her greatest act was not in battles won or enemies outsmarted, but in her refusal to falter. She gave everything to the image, even when her body had little left to give. Her gowns grew heavier, her jewels more lavish, her wigs taller, as if more layers could hold her together. In private, she clung to familiar scents, lavender crushed in her hands, sage near the fire, the bitter tang of poppy syrup on her tongue. These were her anchors in a world slipping away. Her courtiers, already whispering of succession, watched her closely, but she never let them see the truth. To stop being queen was to unravel England. So she persisted, a statue in motion, a scented painting ruling through pain. In her final days, even mirrors became her enemy. She no longer trusted her reflection, surrounding herself instead with symbols, paintings, music, candles, fragrance, anything to remind her of the queen she had been. Her physicians could only watch as opiates dulled her senses. The infection in her mouth lingered, and her dreams blurred with fever and regret. Yet, she fought, not with pride or defiance, but because she didn't know how to stop. The crown was her skin, and removing it meant revealing a tired, aching woman. When she left the stage, it was with applause, not pity, her legacy sealed in powder and perfume. Her court was a theater of imitation, where nobles copied her to survive. If she wore rose-scented gloves, so did they. If she paused before speaking, they mirrored her cadence. Her melodic chuckle became their chorus. Her ring-tapping a signal of boredom they echoed. One lord, desperate to impress, drenched himself in musk until he nearly collapsed, his doublet reeking through morning prayers. Another sleeve caught fire from a candle, the oil sparking a brief blaze. These mishaps became quiet jokes, not about scent but about caution near flames. To belong, you reflected the queen, blending into her perfumed orbit. This mimicry was more than flattery, it was strategy. Her speech became court language, her posture etiquette, her scent atmosphere. Men dabbed oils, women tucked herbs in corsets, and the council chamber smelled like a spice market. Some overdid it, their white satin dusted like pastries, their ruffs poking neighbors' eyes. It was loyalty, not ridicule. To stand out, you had to blend in. A warped mirror of her image. The palace grew silent in its absurdity. Voices softer as scents grew louder. They performed in a glass box, ignoring sweat, age, and the rot beneath the floorboards. Because decay was to be masked, not named. Hygiene in Elizabeth's time was not about cleanliness, but about belief. The miasma theory held that foul air carried disease, so good smells meant safety. Perfume was a shield, not a soap. Walls were draped with lavender, carpets sprinkled with rose water, gloves soaked in ambergris. The palace smelled like a garden, but mold clung to the walls, stains marked the floors, and life stirred in the corners. Elizabeth's rosewater rinses and scented gloves were talismans, warding off illness and judgment. She smelled better than peasants, so she was healthier. Scent was hierarchy must for the powerful, spices for the connected, sweat for the rest. The truth was less poetic. Disease spread through stagnant water and crude drains, not air. But they didn't know. Rats roam, rivers stank. Yet as long as death didn't smell, they believed it wasn't there. Herbs, smoke, and orange peels were their desperate hopes, fighting invisible threats with fragrant rituals. We mock them now, but we're not so different. We chase clean smells, lemon cleaners, minty breath hiding reality with pleasant illusions. Elizabeth's court had no microscopes, only lavender and faith. They thought a floral scent could tame the world. It couldn't. Disease spread, people died, but they died believing they'd fought. Elizabeth transcended the filth, not by washing but by enchanting. Her scent was her first impression, her lasting legacy. She didn't invent this system, she perfected it. Every glove, every kerchief, every herb-stuffed bodice was armor, battling the stench of surmise without a sword. She couldn't fix the sewage or banish the river's reek, but she could control her image. Her fragrance was a wall, not against illness, but against scrutiny. Ministers, poets, ambassadors all bought the fantasy, marveling at her youth, her energy. Even as her teeth darkened and her bones ached, the odor of decay was real. But her commitment to illusion was stronger. Her palace was a stage, her body the lead, every day. She erased vulnerability with powder and perfume. The court needed the myth as much as she did a fragile kingdom propped up by the idea that the queen could never falter, never stink, never die. Today, we dissect her with fascination and horror, shaking our heads at her unwashed wigs and lead-laced face. Yet, we envy her power to curate an identity that outlived her. Her age was filthy streets were cesspools, food rotted, Rats were as common as chairs. Everyone stank, and everyone adjusted, turning smells into meaning. A woman with rosemary was refined, a man with leather rugged, a queen with incense divine. Step into the grand halls of surmise, dear traveler, and feel the air pause, heavy with the weight of too many breaths, too many bodies, too many ambitions. This was no ordinary palace, it was a stage, and Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, was its unchallenged star. Her teeth rotted from years of sugared violets and marzipan, a luxury that marked her wealth but left her in pain. Toothaches throbbed through sleepless nights, infection swelled, and her breath grew sour. A secret no one dared name. Physicians offered clothes to chew, wax to pack her gums, opium to dull the ache. But dentistry was closer to torture than medicine. She resisted, hating the vulnerability of Anne. Open mouth, but the pain forced her hand. In secret, trusted doctors worked, their efforts hidden from the court's eyes. Her breath betrayed her, curling the air when she spoke, making courtiers lean back. Yet they blamed the room. The heat, never her. She adapted, speaking less up close, keeping a clove-laced handkerchief near. Her lips, offering her gloved hand for greetings. Fans grew larger, gloves more fragrant. Speeches shorter. The court mimicked her, their silences more polite, their gestures more guarded. A noble once called her presence rich and enveloping, a delicate sidestep around the truth. Another spoke of thick dignity in the air. They chose their words carefully, preserving the myth. Elizabeth knew she saw the flinches, the hesitant pauses, but she held the illusion. Because a queen's weakness could unravel a kingdom every morning, before a single decree was uttered, or a scroll unrolled, she was assembled, not as a woman, but as a myth. Her maids moved like silent priests, layering her with lead-based paint, stiff corsets, and gloves dripping with the scent of roses. The process was not preparation, but ritual, a transformation that took hours to ensure no trace of humanity slipped through the cracks of her divine facade. Her face, smooth with Cheroo's a toxic blend of white lead and vinegar, became a porcelain mask, pale as moonlight, untouchable by the sun's labor. This wasn't vanity, it was a declaration. I'm not like you. I'm above the earth's toil. Vermilion, laced with mercury, was dabbed on her cheeks, a false flush of youth to hide the fevers that sometimes trembled beneath. Her lips, when the occasion demanded strength, were painted red, a signal of vitality she could no longer claim naturally. Ground pearls dusted her forehead, catching candlelight with a glow that wasn't human, but crafted, a beauty best admired from a distance, where the cracks in the lead didn't show. The gowns came next, heavy with embroidery and expectation, each stitch a testament to her power. They were never washed water was the enemy, capable of shrinking velvet or fading dyes. Instead, maids brushed them with stiff bristles, shook them near windows, or hung them by fires to draw out dampness. Sachets of lavender, clove, or orris root were sewn into hems, tucked between pleats, creating an illusion of freshness that faded up close. These dresses carried stories, wine stains on cuffs, rouge where her cheek brushed the collar, the faint sourness of a long council meeting. They were archives, not clothes, too sacred for soap. Her gloves, soft leather or silk, were soaked in violet, camphor, or rose oil, a fragrant barrier between her and the world. Courtiers kissed them, not her hand. Because a queen's skin was too holy for touch, the scent lingered, outlasting the stitching, carrying the residue of meals, handshakes, and thrown arm grips. The ruff, wide as a halo, framed her face, detaching it from her body, a divine icon floating above the court. This wasn't dressing, it was becoming the Virgin Queen, a process so exhausting it could bruise ribs and steal breath. Yet no one dared question why a woman of her intellect needed such armor to face her ministers. The court was a sensory battlefield, where scent was the opening salvo. Elizabeth's fragrance musk, rose, ambergris thrived before her, a cloud so potent it claimed rooms before her footsteps did. It was her shield, her brand, her unspoken command. A noblewoman's violet oil signaled refinement, a courtier's civet marked wealth, poor attendants, smelling of wool and cheap rosemary, were tolerated briefly, their presence a reminder of the hierarchy. Elizabeth's scent was a symphony, curated to overwhelm, announcing her before she spoke. Lingering after she left, foreign envoys wrote of the court's air, heavy as a temple or a Damascus market. Not always a compliment, but proof her presence was felt. Her perfumes shifted with intense saffron for tense negotiations, lavender for suitors, frankincense when betrayal loomed. Diplomats mimicked her, hoping to flatter her nose, though some misstepped. Entering like a spiced bazaar ablaze at banquets, the fragrance wore peaked tablecloths soaked in rose water, silverware white with orange oil, gloves reeking of ambergris. It was less about dining and more about surviving the air. Courtiers coughed behind napkins, hoping no one noticed. Elizabeth's scent owned the room, her power complete before a word was spoken. Paintings couldn't capture it, but those near her knew her rules were inhaled, not just seen. The court adjusted, scheduling meetings after baths, warning visitors to wear scent but not too much. Maids carried herb sachets for quick fixes, and policy was debated through clouds of resin. Rebellion, when it came, passed through lavender. It's tempting to laugh, to imagine a queen ruling by fragrance, but in her world, scent was loyalty, obedience. Command, it was her first impression, her lasting legacy. A silent decree that filled rooms without a word. The palace was a theater, and Elizabeth played her role with relentless precision, hiding sweat, age, and pain beneath layers of perfume and powder. Beneath the illusion, her body told a different tale. Her gowns, never washed, carried more than scent. They held history, a stain of wine, a trace of rouge. The heat of a nervous negotiation lingered in the fabric, but with the weight of ambition, ceremony, and carefully masked truths. This was Elizabeth's stage, a world where every gesture, every scent, every silken fold was a performance of power. The Virgin Queen, painted in lead, draped in velvet, and crowned with wigs stiff with wax, was not merely a woman. She was a myth, a monument crafted daily to defy the frailties of flesh. Yet, beneath the powdered cheeks and rose-scented gloves, her body whispered a different story, one of pain, decay, and a relentless fight to keep the illusion alive. Her health was a secret guarded as fiercely as her throne. By the later years of her reign, her teeth, once bright, had darkened from years of sugared violets and marzipan, luxuries that marked her wealth but left her in agony. Toothaches throbbed through sleepless nights, infection swelled her gums, and her breath grew thick, sour, carrying a hint of something no perfume could fully hide. In the 16th century, dentistry was a brutal art closed to chew for fleeting relief. Metal picks to scrape decay, iron forceps for extractions with no anesthetic, just pain and hope. Elizabeth resisted, dreading the vulnerability of an open mouth, but the ache forced her hand. In private, trusted physicians worked, packing her mouth with wax, applying opium-laced pastes. Their efforts shrouded from the court's curious eyes. No one dared name the truth. Her breath, curling the air during speeches, made courtiers flinch, lean back, fan themselves discreetly. They blamed the room's warmth, the banquet's closeness, never her. The queen could not smell. The queen was beyond such flaws. She knew. Of course the human nose betrays what words conceal. She saw the hesitations, the tilted heads, the fans fluttering like silent alarms. So, she adapted, speaking less in close quarters, clutching a handkerchief laced with clove or orange blossom, offering her gloved hand for greetings to keep others at a distance. The court followed, their fans larger, their gloves more fragrant, their words fewer. A noble once called her presence enveloping with dignity, a polite dodge around the heavy air. Another spoke of rich majesty clinging to the room. They chose their words with care, preserving the myth. Her pain deepened. Some teeth fell out quietly, others required wrenching extractions. Chewing became a trial, and she turned to soft food soups, stewed fruits, her beloved sweets losing their allure. Whispers spread. She left feasts early, rinsed with rose water for hours, rested alone after meals. These tales never reached the chronicles. The queen was eternal, untouched by something as small as a toothache. Her doctors, more confident than skilled, grew anxious, their visits frequent but futile. In her chambers, she endured the swelling, the bleeding, the dread of each bite while the court kept its distance, too polite to name the truth they sensed. This silence was human, a collective effort to protect the legend that held England together through wars, plagues, and doubts. To acknowledge her pain was to admit mortality, and that was unthinkable. Elizabeth played her part, her gowns heavier, her jewels brighter, her wigs taller, as if layers could hold her together. In private, she clung to familiar scents, lavender crushed between her fingers, sage near the fire, the bitter edge of poppy syrup on her tongue. These were her constants in a world slipping away. Her courtiers, whispering of succession, watched closely, but she never let them see the woman beneath the crown. To falter was to unravel England, so she stood, a statue in silk, ruling through pain she could never voice. Her close stool, tucked behind curtains, was another hidden truth. A simple chair, cushioned to look respectable, hid a brass pot beneath a round hole. Even a queen, draped in musk and lace, answered nature's call. Attendants, silent and discreet, managed the ritual, bringing basins, cloths, and herbs. They poured vinegar scented with thyme, folded towels with practiced hands, and kept their eyes low. This wasn't a bodily function. It was a ceremony. Surmise had no plumbing waste stayed until a servant carried it to a pit or river. The room, draped in heavy curtains, trapped the air, letting smells settle. Lavender sachets hung on hooks, orange peels soaked in vinegar sat in bowls, and censers trailed smoky wisps, but the truth lingered, a scent of flesh beneath the finery. Maids brushed them, tucked in lavender, but the truth remained. The wardrobe chamber smelled of effort-dry herbs, old sweat, rose oil. Camphor scent neither clean nor decayed, but royal. A foreign envoy likened it to a church on fire, smoky and sanctified, with a hint of danger. The oils in the fabrics sparked fears of flames a sleeve too near a candle could smolder, and whispers of such mishaps were hushed to protect the court's dignity. Her wigs were a kingdom apart, dozens lining her chambers, sculpted into curls or coils, lacquered with wax and dusted with violet powder. They smelled of cinnamon, burnt herbs, candle smoke, not hair. Everyone knew her real hair had thinned, its red faded to gray, but the wigs were for display, not deception. They announced her rival, their scent drifting down corridors before her. Never washed, too fragile for water, they held powder, rouge, sweat, creating a fragrance uniquely hers, sweet, spicy, sour. Attendants dusted them with lavender, dabbed vinegar, but the wigs asserted themselves, especially in summer's heat. One, stored poorly, earned the nickname Widowmaker for its mild dewy tang, though no one said it aloud. The court copied her, as always. Men dabbed oils, women tucked herbs in corsets, and the council chamber reeked like a perfumery. One lord, overeager, drenched himself in musk until he nearly fainted, his doublet stinking through prayers. Another sleeve caught fire, a warning to mind candles, not scent. These were loyalty, not mockery. To belong, you mirrored the queen, blending into her fragrant orbit. Her speech, her pauses, her chuckle became their script. They performed in a glass box, ignoring sweat, age, and the rot beneath, because decay was to be perfumed, not named. Hygiene was a ritual, not a reality. Water was feared, thought to open pores to disease. Instead, they masked with rose water, vinegar, and herbs. Elizabeth's linens were changed often, a luxury, but her gowns, wigs, and corsets went unwashed. Her hands were wiped with scented cloths, her face blotted, not rinsed. Cleanliness was a performance, and she was its master, her scent a sermon of power. Compared to the muddy streets of London, where peasants shared beds with livestock, she was a saint of cleanliness, her rose water rinses and perfumed gloves a revolution in vinegar and hope. Enter the heart of Surmise Palace, dear traveler, where the air hangs heavy, not with the freshness of open fields,